Mage Storytime, Episode 24, Vampire Huntin' Fools. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. It was another normal Wednesday when we met again. Since our intervention, we had been informed that the local Thanatos chantry had gotten rid of their murderous members, especially after finding out the leader of the faction was tainted by his inverted avatar, so we were riding pretty high on the moral horse. The feeling of smug superiority lasted until we found a letter in our mailbox at the store. It was, like so many had been, fancy, including a wax seal and everything. Tello held it up between two fingers at arm's length and made a face, but we decided to open it anyway. It turned out to be a summons from the local vampire court. We were going to be errand boys for a bunch of bloodsuckers. So much for the moral high ground. Well, the letter informed us that we were summoned to appear before the Twilight Court at somewhere called Club Inferno. We didn't know for sure that it was vampires, but it was clearly vampires. The club was in one of the trendier neighborhoods downtown. We all felt a little out of place in our motley collection of clothes and surreptitious body armor. Hey, we weren't stupid. But it was probably dark enough inside that nobody would notice. In addition to her light armor, Tello also sported a face mask with an LED mask. The combination made her look more like a standard raver than the rest of us, but no one mentioned anything else about the armor. The rest of us preferred the armored bomber jackets we had been given, or three-piece suits, or tie-dyed outfits. We were a pretty eclectic bunch when we got there. But as I said, no one said anything about our odd sartorial choices, and we were quickly escorted to a roped-off section towards the back of the club. It was actually a separate room formed with draped curtains arranged in a corner. There were beefy vampire guards standing outside the entrance, trying and failing to look like they were just normal people. We could tell they were vampires because of the parasitic spirit things some of us, with spirit sight, could see feasting on their souls. We had learned to look for that sort of thing, and had even seen several others lurking about the club as we passed. We walked into the VIP section to find several scantily clad people in positions that could only be called languishing. They were draped over the chairs, the tables, and one another, and the one in the center of the flesh pile shifted forward and out from under a few supermodels as we came in. She greeted us cordially and offered us a seat and some wine. The audible pause before wine made us all suspicious, and we opted for hard liquors instead. Except for Alwi, who had no fear, or was just nuts, and rather enjoyed his glass of Merlot. The vampire prince chuckled melodically. Introductions were made, and we asked if she had wanted something, or if this was simply a social call. Prince Mara Tan, as she introduced herself, said that we were indeed there for a purpose. Our services to multiple groups of the Tremere had not gone unnoticed, and the court was pleased to find mages so willing to aid the Camarilla in their quest to coexist peacefully with the kind. We didn't know what half of the words she used were, but we nodded politely and pretended to keep up. We had shown ourselves willing to aid vampires, and some of our other activities suggested we also liked to dispose of troublesome ones. We pretended not to know what she was talking about. There was apparently a gang of ne'er-do-well nightfolk in the area that needed disposing of, called the Bali. We had no idea who that was, but we were quickly told that they were a demonic sect of kindred, or vampire, who used blood sacrifice to try to summon their infernal masters. At least that was their normal activity. The group that had come to town apparently got up to even worse stuff, and rumor had it that they may even have some sort of powerful bomb, although the prince had no idea what kind. We made a leap of logic and told the prince the story of the spirit nuke, which she appreciated. However, she and her kind didn't deal much with the spirit world, so it really didn't affect them, except insofar as it might destroy all reality. The court didn't know much about where the Bali were hunting, if only because they had just found out they were in town. It seemed their modus operandi was to try to hide themselves among their less unsavory kin, so if we watched where vampires gathered, we would likely find the Bali. It was just a matter of telling our allies from our enemies. Maybe we could look for new and unknown vamps? The two most happening spots at the moment were a lesbian bar, Club Scylla, and a pool-themed club named Charybdis that were across the street from one another. As a help to our cause, she even offered to order her people to stay away from there for the next week or so, meaning that any vampires we saw were either Bali or Independents. We figured that might tip our hand to the Bali, though, or otherwise cause them to not show, so we suggested some sort of password. Our idea of the laugh was greeted with icy glares, so we asked if they had any ideas, and after several tries, most of them unrepeatable, a simple call and response system was set up. We took special care to memorize our lines and made doubly sure that Alwi had his down. It took him a few tries, but he got it in the end. With that info in mind, we did check to see what the official ways to destroy a vampire were, as we'd mostly been relying on pop culture and excessive force. We were told sunlight, fire, and decapitation were the only sure ways, but when we checked, the prince grudgingly admitted chainsaws, explosions, and throwing them into an eldritch pain dimension would also work. Plus, the Bali happened to be susceptible to being harmed by articles of faith, such as holy icons, holy water, and so on, regardless of the wielder's so-called true faith. That meant that anyone could use them, which was convenient since the only ones in our group that could probably muster true faith were critical, bard, or maybe weeb. Or at least they wore their faith the most openly. But with everyone able to use holy items, and knowing that our favorite tactic of blow 'em up still worked, we felt well prepared. Now to talk about price. Once again, we were offered a boon. I guess that was common currency in the supernatural world. Or maybe lazy writing. But it was always nice to be owed a favor by powerful people. And it allowed us some flexibility for the time. And our compact made, we left. Walking out of the club, we heard a psst. Hey, Iron Goldfish, come here. Implicitly trusting the word of a stranger, or in our own power, yea, hubris, we followed the voice. As about a half-dozen men greeted us, Kitty waved a gloved hand at them, on which was printed the symbol of Baron Samedi, his god and ally. Since they didn't flinch, we figured they weren't Bali. But we did quickly notice that one guy had what we would swear were cat eyes. Another had a kind of snout, and a third had enormous canines, even for a vampire, which these guys pretty clearly were. Plus, they introduced themselves as vampires, which was a dead giveaway. They said they were junior members of the prince's court and had a message for us. Specifically that, friend or foe, it didn't pay for mortals to kill vampires. As punishment for our crime against the natural order, we were going to have to give up one of our members as token of our regret. As the leader gave his little speech, the rest of the vampires flanked out and started to advance on us menacingly. They didn't take it kindly when we started to laugh out loud. We pointed out that we hadn't really killed all the vampires, just some of them. There was still one alive as far as we knew. We had just sent him somewhere. Tello offered to send them there too. When the leader said, "Huh?" she touched the stone egg on our armored chest plate and opened a vortex to the dreaded nightmare Cloaca dentata right behind them. There was a great weeping and gnashing of teeth, and then all was silence, only the lingering smell of moist eggs giving any evidence of their passing. We shuddered at their fate and walked on, figuring that whether or not the prince was behind this, whoever sent these fools would hopefully think twice before trying again. Our first stop was Club Scylla. From the descriptions, it sounded like the less damp of the two. We assembled there a few nights later, not much hunting on a weeknight, covered in various holy icons, including a copy of the Principia Discordia for our resident atheist, and an Imperial Aquila for our 40k fanboy, underneath our outfits. Weeb and Tello had also equipped themselves with some light armor. Handy had a jar of garlic sauce. We told him that didn't work on vampires in reality, but he insisted. Plus, it was his symbol of the flying spaghetti monster, whose noodly appendage might yet be able to smite the undead. Probably not, but you never know. As we entered, always had a save point just in case, but it turned out we didn't really need it. Our odd dress sense was not an issue this once, because this happened to be Halloween. In fact, Critical dressed up as Van Helsing and went around waving his cross at people saying, "Vampire check," and no one thought it too odd. Bard went as Superboy, the jeans and t-shirt version. Weeb was a space marine, of course. Tello was a warrior, and so on. The only problem was this night also made it a lot easier for vampires to blend in. Stepping into the bar, we were greeted by an attractive, red-headed, freckle-faced bartender. Then another bartender walked over, and they must have been twins. Or maybe triplets, we recounted as the hostess stepped up. It ended up that there were 6 women who were utterly identical except for their hairstyles. We guessed they were technocracy clones or something, but even still, we got creeped out when they all seemed to blink at the same time. A look with some of our mystic senses told us that what looked like 6 women was actually one mind. And it wasn't a human one. So, probably not a technocrat. Despite the odd women, we set about our duly appointed vampire hunt. Using spirit sight, and a few spirit goggles that we had crafted a while ago, we were able to identify several vampires lurking around the bar. Mostly women, because lesbian bar, but there were a few men hanging about too. There were 9 in total. Vampires, that is. So we started making the rounds. Most of them were approached by Tello, our resident female, who in the guise of hitting on them gave them the code phrase. Weeb looked for any gay male vampires, you could tell by their tightness of their pants, and went over to hit on them / give the code, while Bard and Handy commiserated with the straight males left over. We heard snippets of conversation, and several of the vampires seemed to be trying to stir up emotion about some cause or other. Talk about boots on necks, riots in the streets, taking down a man, and various other revolutionary chatter. This seemed suspicious, but it didn't seem demonic. As always circled with Weeb, he pulled his friend aside and said that his senses were tingling. Weeb asked if he needed to use the bathroom. We said no. Well, yes, but that wasn't the tingling he was talking about. About that time, another red-headed woman walked by, her hair standing out in a giant, fiery dandelion poof. This alone would have stood out, but the pancake makeup with red cheek circles were even more outlandish. She looked like a hot Raggedy Ann, and between her outfit and her body, she was getting a lot of attention as she stumbled giggling through the bar to her table. As she passed the 2 mages, they felt her power resonating. It was hard to be more descriptive than that for such a weird feeling, but she was definitely a magical type person. And Weeb said the resonance reminded him a little of Alwi. The pair started to follow her back to her table, and Alwi walked up to the girl and said hello. "Oh, I'm sorry. What are you? When are you from? Bye." And then she bounced away to her table, where she joined a bald man in biker leathers and sunglasses, and a guy with a green shirt, scruffy hair, and beard toking on a vape pen. Alwi and Weed awkwardly walked over. The conversation stopped except for the girl who said hi. "Hi. Sorry to intrude, but did you ask, when are you from?" 2 days after tomorrow." "You seem pretty grown for that." "Well, Mama always said I grow fast." "Listen, mate, you've got to excuse my friend," said the bald Englishman. "She's done a few too many experimental things, and she's just not really here as our birdie. Ain't that right, Scruffy?" The bearded guy nodded his agreement. At this point, Weeb asked if they were fans of the art, and the signal of magedom got us some recognition. "So, when did you start learning time magic?" Alwi asked, now that we had gotten things out in the open. "Oh, when I was about 13, said the girl. "And you can travel through time now? That's impressive." "Well, I only did the once, and that took a lot of effort. Plus it left me kinda crazy. But we're better now," she chirped. "Do you remember how you did it?" "Well, it wasn't just me, silly. There was a whole bunch of us. You would know. We're friends." "I don't have too many friends, but maybe I can meet some of yours sometime. The ones who helped you with your travel?" "Oh, but I'm supposed to stay here with Group and Scruffy," she said, pointing to Leather and Green Shirt. "Why?" "You know. I can't tell you anything you don't already know, silly." The conversation didn't get much more sensible from there, but Alwi persisted, trying to no avail to draw information about time magic and her apparent time travel from the girl. She wasn't very helpful, but did say that her friends were all good at time magic. And having a good time. That's what ecstatics were known for. Oh, we had no idea what that meant, but Weeb helpfully informed him it was another tradition, like the Celestial Chorus or the Virtual Adepts. The chat continued a while longer, and they all got on well enough when Weeb pulled out his own vape pen and started sharing. Then he pulled out some aspirin pills and, with a burst of will, changed their chemical composition to something far less legal and far more fun. A good time was had by all after that, and we got the contact info for another tradition. Hooray for making friends! By this time, the rest of us had finished our rounds of the bar and had checked out all of the vampires. Most were talking loudly about politics, in part because an election was right around the corner, and in part because they seemed to like stirring shit. But all of them seemed to know the password, so we decided the bar was clean. Whatever the 6 bartender ladies was could worry about protecting the patrons. We didn't want to start a fight with something like that. We made sure the ecstatic mages were sober enough to get home safely, and then we departed. Having spent our Friday night at Club Scylla, Saturday was devoted to Charybdis. It was still Halloween weekend, so our armored costumes were still viable. But they weren't exactly appropriate for the swim-themed club. The center of the circular building was a giant wading pool about 4 feet deep. There were watery seating areas, bars set up to serve poolside, and a small wave machine that activated on command. It was really cool if you didn't mind spending your night in a big bath with a bunch of strangers and their juices. Fortunately, there was a solid floor area ringing the pool, with 3 big entry ramps leading down into the water spaced equidistant around the edge. For the most part, we stayed on dry land, and those of us with spirit vision surveyed the club for vampires once more. We identified our targets and started the survey. Critical and Kitty formed one party. Critical had spirit magic and could point out the vamps, and Kitty would then touch them with the Baron Samedi sigil on his one glove. He was dressed as a stout Michael Jackson, to see if they flinched from the holy symbol. Bard decided to take a more direct route, possibly suggested by Alwi. You see, according to him at least, part of his magic was speaking directly to God as a prophet, which would make him at least equal to, if not greater than, a standard priest. He called Critical over to reinforce his magic, and then began to pray under his breath. Somehow, it worked. After a few muttered words and arcane gestures, Bard declared the water of the club's pool officially holy. We didn't notice any change until we heard a yelp from deep within the watery arena and saw a few figures making beelines towards the exit, with small tendrils of smoke trailing from them. One of them passed near Weeb, who had been merrily splashing and dancing in the water rather than help us do our job. He made up for that when he noticed the man's panicked look in the smoke, along with Bard's frantic arm waving, and put 2 and 2 together. The crowd was thick and rowdy enough that nobody really noticed when Weeb tackled the vampire, dragging him underwater and holding him down with his body weight. It got a bit warm and the water started to bubble around Weeb, and several pointed comments were made about gas, but he smiled and kept his body pressed on the blood-sucking victim. After a prolonged wait, Weeb suddenly dropped about a foot as the body under him turned to ash and dissipated in the water. Weeb pulled a small, magically created rubber stamp from a pocket and stamped a small bat decal next to several others on the side of his helmet. The 2 other figures that were running for the exits were, coincidentally, each heading to a different point of egress from the burning holy water. It just so happened that, by this point, we had spread out enough to be close enough to cover these exits, and a mental burst from Bard let everyone know what was up. When one vampire staggered out of the water, Tella was standing there to hip-check him back in. The attack was unexpected, and the vamp lost his footing, falling back into the holy water with a splash. Scalded, he jumped back out of the water again, whereupon Tello tried to push him again. He dodged out of the way, but in doing so misjudged a step and stomped back into the water. Distracted by the sudden burning in his ankle, he didn't have the wherewithal to avoid Tello's next attack, which launched him a good 10 feet into the pool. This time he dissolved before he could get out again. Good thing the place was dark and crowded. The final vampire was moving to the exit where Alwi and Critical waited in grim anticipation. A shot to the testicles and a shoulder charge sent him back into the water, where a few hands grabbed him and held him down until all that was left was ash. None of the mundane folks in the club seemed to have noticed, but when we looked around to check the remaining vampires, we found their eyes glued on us as we wiped dirty water off our clothes. Kitty walked over to one and tried to shake hands, hoping to test the holy symbol, but the vampire choked, turned, and dashed towards the door. Kitty hadn't even raised his hand, though, so it was probably more to do with our having brutally and casually, murdered a few of their kind only moments before. We kept making the rounds, though, until Tello found a pair of vampires who had no idea what we were talking about when we gave them the sign. Tello surreptitiously signaled to the rest of us while making small talk. They tried flirting, and the asexual Tello did her poor best to play along. She played along when they bought her a drink and acted appropriately grateful. She even pretended not to notice when one guy clumsily slipped a roofie into it. Tello consoled herself that this guy probably wasn't trying to rape her, at least. He was only interested in drinking her blood, and maybe sacrificing her to a dark god, which is a slight improvement. Weeb, who had taken up Overwatch nearby, also noticed something being slipped into the drink. That was why he'd been set on watch in the first place, after all. Watching her take a steady draught, he stumbled drunkenly over and bumped into her, touching several chi points as he did and negating the effect of the drug. This was fortunate, as Tello had drunk the drug drink, thinking she had transmogrified the additive into sugar water. It normally would have worked, but the loud music was distracting her, and she started to suffer the effects of the roofie. Weeb had sensed her distress through mind magic and went into his act, saving her from the creepy vampire. He then stumbled off, and another party member took up his sentry post. We started to close in as subtly as possible while Tello pretended to be succumbing to the effects of the drug. They offered to take her back to their place, and she said she would after she used the bathroom. Tello moved out of their immediate reach, and the rest of us moved in, although not before one of them also slipped off to presumably use the restroom too. Something about our leering, malevolent grins must have given us away to the other guy, as we weren't quite within reach of the vampire when he suddenly got spooked and made a mad dash for the door. As he passed, several of us took swings, but he evaded our clumsy attempts with preternatural grace. He didn't manage to dodge Critical's magic D20, though. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately given the number of witnesses, the roll was low, so there was no blast of frost or bolt of lightning. Instead, where the die hit, there was left a small, greenish patch of luminescent mold. As the vampire ran, little droplets played off and landed on the ground, leaving a convenient trail to follow. We set off in a similarly leisurely pursuit, following the dripping trail of foxfire fungus. We followed him to a street-level parking lot where he started fumbling around for his keys. While we were walking, Handy pulled out his backpack, which was empty, but allowed him to open hand-sized portals around the world and steal whatever he could feel. This time, instead of stealing, he placed a mirror on a park bench in Chengdu, China, literally half a world away. Then, as we stalked the vampire, Handy walked up to him, said, "Excuse me, mister, look at this," and opened a bag full of sunshine right into the vampire's face. It instantly charred the man from the waist up, and Handy quickly closed his bag and walked away, hoping no one had seen the brilliant light in the middle of the night. And just like that, we had our best vampire-slaying device. Unfortunately, having killed the vampire, we no longer had a way to track him back to his people. But that was what he got for going around roofieing people, so we considered it a righteous kill. But we did have his keys, left sitting on a pile of dust, and it didn't take long to find his car. And in his car, we found what we were hoping for, a GPS device. Thank goodness for technology. Weeb and Alwi, our resident virtual adepts, turned the engine on and started prowling through the vampire's recent travel history. One of the most commonly visited areas was an apartment, which was probably where he lived. A few restaurants, clubs, and movie theaters showed up as regular stops, but those didn't seem particularly abnormal. And then there was a frequent stop in the warehouse district. That seemed slightly suspicious, as well as thematically appropriate for evil vampires, so we decided to check that one out first. But before that, we decided to deal with Captain Date Rape back at the club. The roofie-dispensing vampire was pleased to see Tello when she found him again at the club. He was less pleased when Weeb inserted a long stake into his heart from behind while Tello distracted him. Then, this girl that he thought was drugged, and probably intended to eat, and her friends, half-carried, half-dragged his rigid body out of the club in a pack. The night was not going as he planned, and it got even worse when we got him back to our shop. In recompense for his creepiness, we decided to take a page from the Book of Archimedes, our hermetic friend. Actually, we just carted the vampire straight to him. The Archmage was pretty grumpy about being woken up in the middle of the night, and was threatening to start lobbing fireballs until we showed him the present we had brought. Then he was all smiles. A short ritual later, along with a lot of screaming, and we had a new sentient toilet seat cover to decorate our bathroom. It even blinked. Neat. Having done our civic duty by disposing of a potential rapist, we got back to the business of hunting evil vampires. You know, as opposed to the regular kind. We decided to show up at the warehouse during the day, since we would have the advantage then. We set up in a couple of cars parked down the block with a good view of the warehouse door. Using our various mystical senses, we did a check and saw several people working on what appeared to be a loading dock and in some nearby offices. Weeb turned himself into a bird, flew up to the roof, became a rat, and climbed down into the warehouse to watch physically, while he and Bard relayed information via mind magic. Tello turned herself into a ghost with spirit magic and just walked straight through one of the walls. Or she tried to, but she bounced off some sort of protective ward, hurting the spirit of her nose in the process. She kept bumping up against it, trying to force her way, until Critical dislocated a finger to give her magic more power, allowing her to brute force her way in. Watching, she couldn't really spot any vampiric spirit parasites leeching on the workers. During most of the workday, people went in and out, going about their regular jobs like regular people. We began to feel disheartened, but decided to keep waiting until after dark, when things might get more lively, as it were. Our patience paid off. At 5, everybody clocked out and went home, except for 2 people who went into one side of the side offices and seemed to be talking. A few minutes after darkness fell outside, 3 people came out of a different office where there shouldn't have been anyone. The newcomers' pale skin marked them as vampires, which Tell confirmed with her spirit sight, relaying the information to the rest of us via Bard's group telepathy. A curious weeb scurried over to check it out and found a large trap door in the middle of the office space leading into a basement of some kind. Investigating, he saw several coffins and makeshift beds scattered around the basement. Of more immediate concern was the quartet of chanting, robed figures standing around a large sigil drawn on the floor and walls in disconcerting shades of red. There was even a small, whirling vortex of unreal cover and headaches open in the air behind them. Weeb gave us the mental signal to attack when we heard the screaming, and then started to enact his own dastardly plan. Ducking behind the door in the office he was in, Weeb returned to his original form, and then he became so much worse. He started to grow and morph, his skin turning into iron-hard chitin, his hands growing talons and biomorphic blades, while he sprouted a few extra limbs and grew to a gigantic height. Ultimately, he became a sort of science fiction bug creature thing that was covered in more blades than was really wholesome. Kitty, who played with an army of these monsters on the tabletop, heard Bard's description of what was happening and hid under a blanket in the backseat of the car. He wanted no part of a universe in which these monsters were real, no matter whose side they were on. Most of us agreed with him, but decided we should launch our attack anyway. As Bard summoned his superheroes and simply punched down the door, Weeb launched his horrifying assault on the floor below. In his sci-fi insect form, he bug-handled, the sunlight grenades he had packed up to his maw, pulled one of the pins with his drooling teeth, and chucked the bandolier into the room. The screams of agony that greeted the explosions indicated that these were probably vampires. Or maybe they just didn't like getting hit with a magical flashbang. Either way, they were distracted by the explosives, and that was all the opening Weed needed before he was among them. Bioblades flashing, horns goring, and blood squirting all over his chitinous body. Hearing the description later on, we were pleased not to have been there. Kitty almost fainted from the second-hand account alone. Weeb's charge gored one chanter on his horn, then a few slashes dealt with the 2 others standing nearby. As chunks of his friend fell off the last chanter, he looked at the monster that Weeb was, urinated, then put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. At the same moment, the rest of us hit the front door. As the rest of the party burst in the door, Handy took a moment to look around to make sure we weren't breaking the law, of man or physics, in front of any witnesses. He didn't get a good look, but he swore there were shadows and figures moving around in the alleyways just down the street. He suggested that speed was our friend in this case, so we took his advice and threw subtlety down an elevator shaft. We didn't have any such shaft handy for the few vampires and ghouls standing on the ground floor, but we did our best. The combination of screams from down below and a loud entrance from the front left them paralyzed for just a brief moment, and then we were on them. Bard and Critical charged forward, fist raised, but they never got a chance to hit any of the vampires. That was because Handy, eschewing the bag that he used for small things, opened a gigantic, incredibly vulgar portal between our location in nighttime Dallas and the open, sunlit sky in morning Chengdu. A blast of cheerful sunshine literally filled the warehouse's main floor, incinerating two of the figures. The remainder shielded their eyes and blinked a lot, but that seemed a fairly mundane reaction, so we decided they were probably human. Our charge faltered a second when half our targets disappeared, but we shifted focus and soon Bard and Critical were punching and bopping away at the remaining humans, while Alwee, Handy, and Ghost Tello provided ranged assistance, and Kitty hid from Weeb's new nightmare form. These humans seemed sturdier than normal, but we had plenty of magical oomph to deal with them. It took next to no time before we had them mopped up. Weeb had likewise been having his way with the vampires and mystic chanters in the basement. They were all dead within a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, the death and bloodshed seemed only to feed the swirling, inky black and blood-red portal. Thinking quickly, Weeb turned to some of the sigils and figures painted on the walls and floor and started to deface them. His claws and talons scythed into the floors, scratching huge chunks out of it and utterly destroying the markings. With that, the portal started to shrink and collapse. Until, that is, a hand the size of Weeb's torso broke through the portal, grabbed one edge, and stopped it mid-closure. A deep, throaty voice chuckled. Not too bad, my son. That might have helped about 10 minutes ago. Too bad. So sad. And then another hand came through, and they started to force the vortex open again. Back above, we all heard the voice and felt the shivers it caused crawling up our spine. Then, through Bard's team telepathy, we heard Weeb, still in his nightmare fuel form, screaming and gibbering for help in incoherent terror. Bard thought fast and immediately started praying for any divine help or guidance he could receive. Unfortunately, he apparently worshipped the wrong deities, as a stentorian voice told him they didn't respond to heathens. Then Critical got on the line, and apparently he was more orthodox, because his prayers to the heavenly powers actually got an answer. Bard felt slighted. Apparently the angels didn't like him, even if God did. But it didn't matter when Raguel, archangel and patron of keeping fallen angels in check, floated down from the heavens and manifested on the warehouse floor. The patron of smiting reached down and ripped half the floor right off, chucking the cement slab over his shoulder nonchalantly. From the now open ground floor, we could see a monstrous demonic head and shoulders starting to emerge from the vortex, while a chitinous Weeb huddled whimpering in the corner. All the angel said was, "Be gone, foul one." The demon took one look up, said, "Bugger this for a game of soldiers. I don't need to fight for this world. My master Mammon already owns it anyway. You've seen what this law'll do for money or power. You can have it, angel. Much good it'll do you or them." And with that, he vanished back into the opening, pulling it shut behind him as he went. And so the field was ours, although we could all feel our avatars nodding behind us, encouraging us to see the angels and demons that operated in this world already. We could all feel the power building, and wondered what this would mean for the future. It was around this time, as we were kicking over the vampiric dust piles and checking on the mortal prisoners, that the door burst open behind us and a cadre of people wearing black robes busted in, saw the destruction, and stumbled to a halt. Some had shotguns, others had swords, and there was even a lightsaber, and all were brandishing crosses. We're here to destroy the evil ones?" said one of the robed figures, uncertainty in his voice. Apparently, they were a squad of monster-hunting badasses who were going to save us when the vampires and their horrible master had us on the ropes. That would have been awesome. Too bad we were so stupidly powerful. Oh well. It was about then that we saw the clerical collars and wimples that all of the party seemed to be wearing. And Bard, Weeb, Alwee, and Kitty recognized one of their high school teachers. It was the Jesuits. I guess the Catholic Church had its own squad of vampire hunters. At least, that's what the teacher told his former pupils, after giving them a familiar greeting. We awkwardly informed them that we had dealt with the vampires already, and the demon they summoned. That got the attentions of the priests and nuns, and they started asking questions intently. It took some explanation, but eventually both parties realized that, despite our philosophical differences, we were all more or less on the same side. The Jesuits promised to clean up for us, and we got their contact info in case we needed them in the future. If nothing else, it would be mighty convenient to have them around to save us if we had gotten in over our heads in the future. But when would that ever happen? Who will the Iron Goldfish meet next? Have they developed a rep in heaven or hell? And how will they get in over their heads next time? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.